This is a session under the title Systems on the Brink. Why must philanthropy break to evolve? What is it that we need to smash, and what is it that we need to carry forward in this moment? And no, we had no better a person than Brian Kagoro to throw up some of the myths, some of the thoughts that we take comfort in, but may not be necessary for us to take forward in the coming years. So the panelists are going to speak. I'm going to ask them a few questions just to get them going, a couple of questions, and then we're going to come to you. So I'm going to invite you to start thinking about the questions that you would like to ask, the comments you'd like to make, and we'll do a round of those, and then we will come back to them for closing remarks. Mendi Jonjo is the KCB, the Kenya Commercial Bank Foundation Director. She is a feminist, has worked for many years to promote the empowerment of women in various spaces, and she came to KCB after a stint at the HIVOS development organization where she was the East Africa Director. Margaret Miller has been with Ford Foundation for several years now. She is a youth advocate historically. Now she advocates for more than just young people, but is somebody who has been very concerned by inclusion of young people in all matters governance and development. She now runs the East African office of Ford Foundation, and congratulations, Margaret, for your recent appointment. Briggs Bomba is the program director at Trust Africa. Trust Africa, of course, is based in Dakar, Senegal. He is I don't know if he's naturalized Senegalese yet, but he is a Zimbabwean national. And for many years, Briggs has been very concerned about financing for development, the issues of natural resource governance, and various other, I guess, concerns, some of which showed up in Brian's presentation. Let me ask Mendi the first question. And as you can probably gather, we've deliberately set up this panel to be diverse in the sense of there is a person who's working within the corporate space, within the development partner space or the funding space, and also somebody who kind of straddles and is thinking about ecosystem, but is working very much closer to civil society organizations. For Mendi, the question I think that we thought it would be useful to get you going, first of all, is what should shape, what can we carry forward from the history of philanthropy, and what must we now begin to shape afresh?
Thank you, Irongo, for that question. And I'm also fully aware that I am following Brian, who, if I took home two things, I think the first is that my remarks should not be scandalous echo chambers of the empire. That's one of the things that I took. And I think, in all sincerity, it's also that invitation to really interrogate what it is that we're doing, and remark and reflect on the broader impact that our work has. So to answer your question, Irongo, I feel that when it comes to corporate philanthropy, and the question that you asked, some of the things that we find ourselves in at this really pivotal time is that I feel we have to reshift both corporate thinking as well as our thinking about what corporate thinking is. And for me, what is really interesting is that nexus between where business as well as community value intersects, and where you can find really profound as well as important value in this space. I feel that if corporate foundations, or if corporates, or if indeed any of us is going to work in this particular space, I think the first step that we must do is to consider from whom the legitimacy to participate in these spaces comes from. I feel that some of the work that we have to focus on is making sure that our legitimacy is indeed grounded from communities, and that it also has to be deeply reflective in terms of that interweaving of what do communities need. And again, not tokenistic surface, quick build, I think the example that was used was a classroom that serves 1,000 people, and I built 2 toilets. I think to go beyond that, to really interrogate what do communities need, because I feel that for corporates, especially for those of us who are in corporate foundations that are working with corporate bodies that are involved with the foundation, because some do have that Chinese wall between the foundation as well as the corporate body, there are certain insights that you get from the corporate entity in terms of what are the pain points, as well as also what are the opportunities that exist from these communities that they serve. And for me, fundamentally, Irungu, I feel that one of the things that we are called upon is that I got the quote from the Honorable Minister who spoke before, and his phrase was that philanthropy must no longer operate in parallel to national systems, but within them. So I feel that even for these corporate entities, corporate foundations, we must really see how do we serve as catalytic in terms of the golden day of philanthropy, I feel is perhaps behind us. And if we are going to catalyze the sort of change we want to see, we really have to make sure that our work is catalyzing public as well as private sector capital, which by definition tends to be, even if not infinite, it tends to be at the scale that we need to be able to generate the change that we'd like to see.
Thank you very much, Mindy. Let me turn to Margaret and pick up, kind of transition from this conversation around legitimation. We live in a very low trust environment. It is affecting not just civil society organizations or governments or even corporates, but even those social movements that are trying to bring about change. And I think particularly about, the social movements in places like Senegal, in South Africa, and Kenya, and various other places in the United States of America also. They are facing these constant legitimation battles. Looking at the work that you do, what more could we do to create, more trust in the spaces, particularly across the different sectors?
So thank you so much, Irungu. One of the things that I'm taking home, Brian, is I have to accept that colonialism is embedded in us. And then what should I do? Now, going back to Irungu's question regarding what we should do to build trust. Globally, as we all know, trust levels have gone to the lowest. I think they are the lowest at the moment. But they are lowest because we have betrayed the very people that we have to work with. And just even thinking about, for instance, if we think about philanthropy, we are talking about, many times we want to think about institutions, we want to think about visibility, we want to think about finances or money. But then again, we are in a space where people are demanding for accountability. They are demanding for transparency in each and everything we do. And the question then comes in here is when we are thinking about our own organizations, or we are thinking about the work that movements are doing, the first question for me is, are we separating the craft and the institutions, or what with the individuals who are leading this work? Because then, in terms of separating the two, when I think about philanthropy is love for humanity, what does love for humanity comprise? Justice, equity, equality, fairness. But then there's also this other side of the person, the institution that is leading this work. Where do we separate that? And if we don't separate that, then we are not able to really build trust. Secondly, I am also thinking about the fixation on money. That change has to happen when there must be money. I often ask the very constituents that I really believe in, young people, I ask them, do you really need money to exercise your civic responsibility? Yeah? that is one of the questions I keep also asking. As much as money is important, but do we need that? And because then we are fixated by money, then everyone thinks when you're doing something, you're doing it for money. You're not doing it because you truly believe in change that comes within. And then even as we think about the work that we are doing, more than often, I'm disappointed. Disappointed in the sense that we want to purport that we know solutions as a sector. But in really sense, we have to have the humility to accept that we do not know. It's the communities that we work with that know the solutions to their answers. We have to also understand what then is our role. We have to get into those communities as facilitators, not as knowledge, people who have the knowledge to change the work that is. And because of that, you realize that more and more, we seem away, there's no ownership of the initiatives that we are making. And then that results into loss of trust. And then finally, I also just want to think about how often do we listen? How often do we co-create with the communities that we are working with? And how often are we removed from the very communities that we are working? Because, and that's why I mentioned the fact that I'm coming out from Brian's conversation on accepting that our minds are not relating to the things that are happening. And again, then, as organizations, as individuals, because we are pushing for our own visibility, then that means we no longer have the legitimacy to represent the communities that we are working with.
That's great. I think, Mag, what I picked from that is with this concept of how do we move from these contracted development models, right, to self-empowerment models that are rooted in communities. And I think that, perhaps, as Brian had said, that would be the starting point for liberatory philanthropy. Briggs, let me ask you a question that relates to, I guess, coming back to, if I can frame it within the context of Brian's comment. So Brian asked us, he implored us, he demanded that we start from the position of intellectual freedom, that we leave the conversation, the technical conversation about financial transfers, and think about power and the relationships that are built around the work that we do. If you took that a little bit further, what is it that philanthropy, liberatory philanthropy could do to actually restructure governance in a way in which it could be more effective in the way that we've heard Brian speak this morning?
Thank you, Irungu. Brix Bomba is the name. I serve as the Director of Programs at Trust Africa. We are a Pan-African foundation that's just about to turn 20 years old. We were founded in a moment where that I would call equally historic, where philanthropy, a particular philanthropy, had a conversation about what was the most relevant thing to do at that particular time in order to shift the development trajectory on the continent. And this was global philanthropy. And the debate went in the directions of saying we could increase the budgets of our regional offices. I think we can name names. This conversation was happening at Ford Foundation. So we could increase the budget of the West Africa office, Southern Africa, East Africa, MENA region. And there were others who argued that you needed proximate action. So you needed to appreciate that problems coexist with solutions. And those who are closest to the challenges that development is seeking to solve are actually the bearers or the solution bearers. So in the end, it was resolved in the direction that said, let's invest in catalyzing or creating an African institution that will be located on the continent, led by Africans in terms of its governance, in terms of its staff, and will have proximacy to the different communities that we are seeking to work with and to walk along with. And that's how Trust Africa was created 20 years ago, with a mission to strengthen African agency and to strengthen African-led solutions. So that's where we are coming from. And I believe that we are in an equally historic moment. And I think from everything we heard from Brian, from what we heard from the minister, as well as from what we heard from Evans in the morning, this is a crossroads. It's a historical crossroads. I think the organizers of the conference have defined it for us by hinting at the social, economic, and political shifts. And I think there's a certain tentativeness in the language that is being used where we are talking of them being at the brink. One can actually argue that they are in peril, or they have collapsed or are collapsing. I think that's what we are seeing. And it's a crossroads. And when you get to a historical crossroads like this, the choice is either historical regression, where we move backwards and we start to delete words like solidarity, sustainability, equity, diversity, inclusion in our lexicon, as we have seen. I think those who saw Rubio talking about him not going to South Africa for G20, he said it's because they are promoting sustainability, they are promoting equity, they are promoting diversity. There's that effort for historical regression. Or we can bend the arc of history towards a more just society. And I think this is how philanthropy needs to be thinking about the visioning that Brian talked about. I confirm, affirm, and associate myself with that, thinking that it's not a moment where philanthropy should just be thinking about showing up with resources. It's a moment where philanthropy should be thinking about showing up with a vision. And it's a vision of what a more just society, a more equitable society, a more sustainable society looks like. And what it means to work with those who are advocating for systemic change in this moment and at this particular time. What it means to support them, what it means to resource them, what it means to provide protection, what it means to build power that can deconstruct the house that the master has built. So I think this question of vision, the vision that philanthropy shows up with at this particular crossroads is absolutely critical. But I also wanted to say, Irungu, that it's important that we situate philanthropy properly in the matrix of development resourcing or development financing. Because there's ways in which, when you look at part of what characterizes this moment is the massive shifts in the funding landscape that have been referred to in this morning. People talk of USAID cutting 83% of their contracts, the cuts that we are seeing in budgets from ODA support from the UK, from the EU, and everywhere. So there's that massive shift that has happened there. And there's a way that sometimes we over-romanticize the role that philanthropy can then play. It's almost like philanthropy can become the silver bullet when it comes to answering the question of development financing. The African Development Bank estimates that we need $4 trillion annually to finance the Sustainable Development Goals. If we're to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, we needed to have been investing $4 trillion every year. Currently, the financing gap is around $1.5 trillion. If you look at the matrix of development financing sources, you have what you can call domestic public finance or resources, the monies that we are getting from taxation, from our mineral rents, and other sources of domestic financing. And that historically has contributed around 60% of the financing on the continent. ODA has played around $60 billion. If you go to remittances, they've played at around $53 billion. Philanthropy you'll be surprised to know that has played between 3.5. If you really fudge your figures, the maximum you get is around $5 billion. So there's a certain humbleness, I think, that we need to approach this conversation as actors in philanthropy and understand that we actually cannot replace particularly domestic public financing. It has been the most reliable, the most predictable, the most secure source of financing. So when we're talking about the role that philanthropy can play, we cannot disassociate that role from actually making sure that we have functional states, we have effective governance that can engage in domestic resource mobilization, and secondly, that can deploy those resources in a transparent and an accountable manner that deals with the issues that we are looking at, whether it's in terms of health, in terms of education, the social policy, and the social development agenda that Brian was talking about. So we cannot run away from, and I think I've heard it here already on this panel, and I think it came from the minister as well. We can't be engaged in philanthropy in Rwanda and we do not know what the National Development Plan of Rwanda is. We can't be involved in philanthropy in Africa and we do not know what Agenda 2063 is, what the vision for development in Africa is. Because we end up not only working at counter purposes or in tangential purposes, but at the same time, we should acknowledge that we do not have the resources that can meet this gap. Yeah. So we need to imagine our role as being catalytic, as maybe proving certain concepts, development concepts, investing in scaling them up to make sure that we are playing a complementary role, but that aligns with the aspirations that will have been expressed in our countries and that will also have been expressed at a continental level. I see Irungu suggesting that I take a pause.
Only to breathe. Thank you very much to the panelists. Let me invite, let's see, Leslie. Is Leslie there? So there are two things I wanted to, we're going to open up now for a few comments and questions from those of you who have been listening patiently. Leslie, of course, will make sure that if you want to speak in French, she will interpret directly into the meeting. So to give you an opportunity to speak in a language that may be more comfortable for you. Let me request John to give me two people, preferably Kenyans, because we run the fastest. I've told that many times. I can, at the moment, let me just request actually two runners who can help us with mics. So by show of hands, if you can raise your hand, I'll take the first three or four. I have one here very quickly. I have two. I have three. Middle, four. Okay. Keep your hands up, the people I've just mentioned. So one was there. There was two there. A gentleman with a white shirt. A sister here in black, and a gentleman there with blue shirt. Okay, keep your hands up, just so that Leslie can see you. Okay, excellent. So quick, short questions or comments?
Thank you. So Maurice Odhiambo is my name. I teach international relations at the University of Nairobi. And I've also been in this space for many years. I'm still trying to understand where we are going with this conversation. I think we are trying to deconstruct quite a number of things here. And the vision still doesn't seem to be very clear. On the one hand, we have the vision of agile philanthropy. And my first question was going to be on that. Then I changed my mind. I still need to understand what this agile philanthropy is. Can it answer the questions that are being raised, have been raised so far by the speakers who have spoken? Now I see a conflict in the vision.
So we could probably take one more comment, Maurice.
Yes, please. I see Brian coming up with something slightly different, which is more radical. So are we going with a radical vision in this conversation, or do we want to stick to the vision of, if I could call it normative and so on? So that is something that we need to deconstruct, perhaps before we are even able to make sense of this. We know, for example, Irungu, if you give me a minute, we are talking about
we have to be brief.
Yes, we are talking about the dependency model. If we go on with this conversation within that model, then are we going to make any breakthrough? And I think I hear that that is basically the problem that Brian is trying to bring up. So are we radical, or do we just want to walk the trodden path? Thank you.
Great questions. Provocation. Here, I think, Leslie, is that number 2? Yeah, okay. So name and comment or question.
My name is Hilary Musarurwa. I do agree with what Briggs is saying, that philanthropy funding will not be sufficient. I would advocate for blended finance. But my question is the ecosystem ready for this? And that readiness speaks around regulatory frameworks. And if we are to transform towards this blended finance or more of innovative finance going forward, how are we going to do it? Are the actors or the players in the sector also ready to accept this type of funding? So I think we need to reflect on going forward, how is the ecosystem ready to have this transformation in the type of funding that we can access?
Great question. Let me invite our sister here.
Thank you. I am Fuzia, represented Somalia local NGO of the Foundation. My question is, what are the same of the most successful models of collaboration between international philanthropists and Somali NGOs that have been led to sustainable and impactful outcomes? And how can we replicate this successful success across other regions in East Africa? Thank you.
Yeah, I think last comment. Okay, I can see new hands, but yes, here in the blue shirt. And then we'll come back to the...
Thank you so much. My name is Philippe Mwakuzi, and I present an NGO called NABU. So my question goes to Ford Foundation, but or to other philanthropies, in regard to the way the funds are distributed. I mean, like they are given, most of the time I would say like they are also, in a way, they focuses on the big big people with big visibility, where they can also see the visibility as donors, and in that, what I can call the queen of funding. And then in that case, it affects sometimes these grassroots foundations that are actually doing the impact on the ground level. So how, like, are we, as we leverage this, how do we also work with the grassroots organization, foundations and other people down there to increase the impact, like Brian talked about?
Thank you, nice and clear. Let me turn back to the panel. I would have preferred to have had taken a few more comments, but the good news is that by doing this, we're able not to combine tea and lunch, which happens in some conferences, right? So, like, go for tea and then have lunch. So we're going to break right in a few minutes so that we can take tea as we go into the work streams. But let me invite the panelists, 3 of them, in no more than between 30 seconds and a minute, right? And those are Kenyan minutes, to just respond to anything that they've heard, but also to do their closing remarks. Let's go in reverse order. Let's start with Briggs.
Okay, so what I forgot to mention in the story that I opened with is that Ford Foundation gave $30 million to then establish what became Trust Africa. And I'm sharing this as an encouragement to other global philanthropies in the room that you can be bold, you can be courageous, you can take risks in investing beyond yourself, but in actually catalyzing the creation of new formations and entities that could maybe do the job in a much more effective manner. I think when we talk about philanthropy, of course, we spoke about the limitation in terms of scale, but there are certain edifying features that we cannot forget, especially when talking about African philanthropy. You know, features like solidarity, mutuality, the different ways that we give time, talent, treasure, beyond finance, to include other, ways of showing up to mutually support each other. I think those are absolutely critical. And I mentioned earlier on the issue of investing in proving concepts and investing in catalyzing. So I think at this particular moment, if I'm to say anything, I'll say we should, as philanthropy, see ourselves as investing in catalyzing systemic change at this particular time, not stabilizing systems that are collapsing or that have collapsed. It's a debate that we can have during the additional time that we have, but we need to invest in catalyzing system change at this particular moment. The last thing that I'll say is we believe at Trust Africa in an ecosystem approach to change and transformation. That means in an ecosystem, even if you look at it from a biological point of view, ecosystems means diversity. Rich ecosystems are diverse. It means interdependence. It means a shared purpose. And to also just acknowledge the thinking that has gone into framing this conference, at least from the conversations we've had with the organizers, the question of the infrastructure that underpins or undergirds that ecosystem becomes absolutely critical. And we should not think of it as a passive system. We should actually really think of it as a political, distributive power mechanism that determines who shows up at the table, whose voice is heard. Are young people at the table? Are women at the table? So we should not think of infrastructure in a passive manner, but really think of it as critical to this agenda of bending the arc of history towards a more just society. Thank you.
Thank you, Briggs. Margaret?
Okay, so first, if we want to think about breakthrough with the model of funding and issues around ecosystem and blended funding, I want to first of all suggest that we must run away from buzzwords and go back to normal languages and conversations around what this is. Because more than often we are caught up in very complicated, complex words that sometimes we don't even understand them and we continue using them, whereas we need to reframe our minds and start asking ourselves, what does this really mean? And pack those words for us to be able to take a radical action regarding what really philanthropy will look like for us, and what is this shared vision we have that we want to radically change in the work that we do. And then there was a question around Ford and the resources, that whether they go to the grassroots organizations. One of the things that I want to say, we truly fund ideas, institutions, and individuals. That is our model of funding. And we don't do call for proposals. What we do is we identify specifically individuals, institutions, and ideas that are changing, that are bringing change within the communities that we are working in. So given that that is the model that we use, I encourage you to continue doing the work you're doing. Probably within our strategy, then we are able to see. But I want to conclude, right? Yeah, I want to say something, and for me, this is what I truly believe. It's actually in the Bible that as we do this work, may we diminish and the work that we are doing be seen. Because more than often we are pushing our organizations and we want to take photos everywhere of our logos. to show the work that we are doing. But that is not our work. That is the work of the communities that we are working with. As individuals, we must ask ourselves, is there a time that I am going to say this organization has done what it ought to be done and I'm closing it and happy that I have done what I should have done? And the issue of sustainability for me, it's not about the organization. It's the fact that you have catalyzed the work that you're doing and communities take it up as their own and continue pushing what they're doing. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Mandy.
Thank you. So I'll address maybe two of the questions. In terms of a grand unifying vision, I don't know that there's ever going to be a grand unifying vision that ties all our work together, but my feeling is that if we eschew this sort of reputational or vanity philanthropy, I think we will be that much further down the pike. And in terms of even thinking around what undergirds our work, there's a certain way I feel we can also be looking at the work that we're doing. So for instance, a school with no chalk, right? It's not just going in to make sure that the school has chalk. It is to also look at this absence as a series of decisions that were made by people so that the school ended up in this particular space. And regarding the question that was asked by the gentleman somewhere here, I feel in terms of even our legitimacy, one of the things that I'm greatly encouraged by the conversations that have happened here and that are also happening in the space is that the legitimacy is not necessarily coming from applause. So it's not coming from being seen, but it is coming from proximity to the communities on whose behalf we actually serve. And I feel perhaps in closing, just to keep it to the 1 minute, one of the things that I came into the conference with, and one of the things that I feel I'm leaving this panel with, is that if we are going to rebuild, we shouldn't restore or seek to restore what was. I feel that we really have to put the work into conjuring what could be. And we are all called to do this with courage. Yeah? A word that I would like to also reintroduce into the conversation is that with care, and that also with conviction, that with all the brilliance that comes from the communities that we serve and the collective brilliance that is seated around here in private sector and in public sector, that truly the root can bloom. Thank you.